All right, welcome everyone, and welcome Maggie. It's good to see you and have you here. I'm going to make you a co-host just while I'm thinking about it in case I disappear again due to whatever internet issues I was having. This is a quote from one of Maggie's recent Substack posts. I'm going to read it and just ask you to jot down a couple of notes, and there will be time for you to in a minute share a word or phrase as a sort of encouragement to Maggie as we get started. So you can be thinking about that too while I read this, and no pressure in sharing that information. You can add it to the chat when I prompt you to, or you can skip it. In 2020, both of my kids were grappling with a lot: the pandemic, the divorce, and their father's impending move. Tuck-ins that year were often difficult. Frankly, I wasn't sleeping well either. Weren't many of us lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling or tossing and turning, our minds whirring like overheated laptops? I know I wasn't alone in that. When my son had trouble settling at night, telling me, "I'm trying to think good thoughts, but the bad thoughts keep pushing them out of the way," I wanted to fill him up with good thoughts before bed and to crowd out as many of the worries and sad thoughts as possible. So this became our routine, listing happy memories and things to look forward to. And you know what? It helped. This routine is one I wanted to share with other caregivers and other children, so I began developing it into a picture book manuscript. My Thoughts Have Wings is full of Rhett's happy thoughts. In fact, he and I call it our book, but it's also an invitation for caregivers and children to think of and share their own happy thoughts. What happy thoughts would fill your pages? And if you had time to jot those down, I invite you to do that. Now or later or after we finish our time together tonight. I always like to use a sort of liturgy for my gatherings. So we will do some breathing and hear a poem before Maggie and I start our conversation. And first, I'd love for those, since it's a small group, I'd love for those who are here to introduce yourselves, and you can share your name, your location, and one hope you have for our time together. And if you don't want to speak, you can go on and turn your camera off. I do know several people have registered to watch the recording, so welcome to you if you're watching later on. And I hope that as you watch, you'll take just a moment to kind of transition into a different space and let go of what you were doing before you're watching this and be fully present to this conversation. All right, I'll stop sharing for this part. Let's see, Sarah, will you go first?
Yeah. My name is Sarah. I live in Morgantown, West Virginia. And moments ago, I was putting my son to bed, and we kind of do a similar thing. But we don't do the things to look forward to. So I'm gonna add that. But we always talk through the happy memories of the day and what were the parts you enjoyed. And so anyway, I'm looking forward to hearing more from you, Maggie. Thanks for coming.
Awesome. Lauren, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm from Westerly, Rhode Island, and I actually found out about this kind of last minute, so I don't have a specific hope to get out of this. But I guess joy.
That
I'm happy to
works.
be here.
Great. I'm glad you're here, and joy is always a good thing. So more joy always. And Kelly, thank you for putting some of your good things in the chat. Really ripe tomatoes and being held. Yes, to those things. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. I'm Kelly. I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is East Tennessee. And I think I'm looking forward to thinking a little bit more about the creativity and like ferocity of caregiving. I'm not a pet parent, but I do a lot of caregiving work.
Great. I'm glad you're here, Kelly. And your kitty. Susan.
Hi, I am in the Central Valley of California, Fresno, California, and I found out about you, Maggie, through Charlotte, and I started reading your Substack, and kind of ironically, the thing that I would do when I first found you was read your Keep Moving before bed. Like that was the way I sort of tucked myself in, and I'm just looking forward to hearing the hope that sometimes you can't see how things will be different. And so you do have to hope that it won't always feel this way or it won't always be this way.
Thank you, Susan. I'm glad you're here. I'll go next, and then Maggie, you can go. I'm Charlotte. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and I hope to just be with people who care about words and stories and writing and reading, and receive nourishment from all of you and provide nourishment to all of you, hopefully, through our conversation and time together. All right, Maggie.
Hi, all. I'm Maggie Smith. I am in Bexley, Ohio, which is basically Columbus, Ohio, the middle of the state. I've lived here my whole life. You can see the book behind me on the shelf that comes out tomorrow, which is my 47th birthday. Total accident. This book was not like a birthday gift from my publisher, but when they picked the date, I said, "Oh, wow, that's my birthday." So I'm actually looking forward to having like sneak peek time with an intimate group of people the night before like the book is actually in the world. It feels like a nice kind of like a sweet, soft opening with all of you. So thanks for coming.
Yes, that's lovely. And happy birthday, early happy
Oh,
birthday.
thanks. They really celebrate birthdays at this age. I'm like, it's all kind of the same at this point. It's fine.
Yes. But I get it's cool to have a book coming out on your birthday too, though.
Yeah,
so.
not bad. Not bad. I think the kids are like, so we don't have to get you anything, right? Like this is the inspiring this book was enough, right? Yeah. You're taking us for a meal, right?
Love it. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen again now, and then we will take a few deep breaths. Oh, and you're welcome to add comments and questions to the chat as we go. I can scroll back and find them when it's time. I like to do a 6-count inhale and a 6-count exhale because of James Nestor's book Breath that came out, I think, in 2020. Because every religion from the beginning of time has a prayer that has a 6-count inhale and a 6-count exhale, and it's just a way to integrate our minds, bodies, and souls. So let's do a few deep breaths, and then Maggie is going to read a poem from her book Goldenrod, which was, I still remember going to Church Street Coffee and Books, a local bookstore here that I partner with sometimes, and I grabbed this off the shelf when it came out and sat down with a cup of coffee and like read the whole thing, and then got another cup of coffee and like read it again. And it was just such a lovely, I mean, I had read some of your work before, but this was the first time I did a kind of slow, deep reading. So this book is very special to me, although I love all your books. But let's breathe. And then Maggie will read the poem, Not Everything is a Poem, from Goldenrod, which is this book. Okay, and I'll mute myself while I breathe. All right, Maggie, will you read for us?
Yes, I will. I love when people request poems. It's like we all have requests when we see concerts, and I like when people have poem requests. So this is a Charlotte request. This poem is called Not Everything is a Poem, and the title goes right into the first line. Not everything is a poem or has a poem inside it, but God help me if I can't find one when I empty my son's pockets before I do the wash. One acorn, two rocks, one smooth and gray, one rough and glittering, flecked pink, a chunk of mulch, a wilted dandelion. The poem is there, I think, pressing itself against the grit or splinter or bitter yellow, but I question its mother softness, suspicious of flowers and laundry. I swear I've seen poems riding my boy's back as he runs around our weed patch of a lawn, letting crabgrass saw his ankles because killing it would mean killing the wild violets, his sister's namesakes. I don't dare look for poems in spring, even if all the purple and green are on clearance then. 2 springs ago, my son was so ill he smelled bad sweet, and one morning he woke shitting blood, saying, my name, my name, my name. No poem kept his body from bruising purple that would fade to green, his skin a field of flowers. No, not this poem, and not a poem at all. But he lived. It's spring again, and he lives. It's spring again, and his pockets are full of petals and stones.
Mm. Thank you, Maggie. I got a notification that my internet is unstable. So what I'm going to do is blur my background and go to my bathroom that has a Ethernet connection because I have a workspace in there, and I'm going to do that real quick.
Okay.
But while and just connect to that, it'll make me have a secure connection, even though I won't have a pretty background. And while I'm doing that, I will ask you to go on and start responding to the first question. Also, I love that poem so much, and I wish we could just talk about that for an hour. But I would want to hear a bit about how writing and reading help you belong to yourself, others, and the world. And I will mute myself now while you respond to that.
Okay. How writing helps me belong to myself, others, and the world. I love that. It kind of feels like a nesting doll going out, like belonging to yourself, belonging to your people, and then belonging to maybe the people who aren't necessarily your people, but because they're in the world, they're your people. That's what it is to be human. I always say that, and maybe those of you who sort of like self-identify as writers, writing is the thing I do that makes me feel most like myself. So, I mean, I do a lot of things during the day that don't necessarily make me feel in touch with myself or like myself. But whenever I'm having a hard time, in particular, getting like too far afield from myself or starting to sort of ruminate or spiral or lose myself in stress or worry, whenever I feel sort of untethered for whatever reason, writing always brings me back to center. And maybe it's because it's something that I've done since I was, I've been writing poems since I was 13 or 14 years old. So I think of like these younger versions of myself that I kind of carry with me. And really, almost as far back as I can remember, all of those versions of me love to read and love to write. And I think even pre-poetry, I was probably starting to think like a poet before I was actually writing. And even on the days when I'm not writing poems, which frankly are most days, are days I'm not writing poems, I'm still living in poetry, I think, because I could take a walk with my dog and the way that something sounds, or the way that something looks, or the shape of a cloud, or it doesn't even have to be something in nature, a snippet of dialogue that I hear from someone, a conversation I catch between two kids. I feel like I have a metaphor making brain, which is really just a way of saying a connection making brain. Like if a metaphor is a bridge between two things that you make a comparison. I think I move through the world looking at thing A and thinking about what thing B it's like, sounds like, texturally feels like, reminds me of, looks like, is shaped like. And I don't know how one is built that way, but that is the way I believe I was built. I have no evidence that that is a hereditary trait in my family. And so when I'm writing, I feel very in touch with myself, not just like my nearly 47-year-old self, but like my 30-year-old self and my 22-year-old self and my 14-year-old self, my 7-year-old self. I feel like I bring all those people with me when I'm writing. And really reading is one of the ways I feed my writing brain. You know, it's like nutrition. I'm much better about the words I put into myself. I'm much more careful, much more selective than the actual food I put into myself. I might live on French fries, but I read good books. So I don't know that my GP counts that as self-care, but I do. I think I do a very good job of feeding my mind and my soul, probably better than I do of feeding this like human form. And then as far as connecting with others, it's funny. Writing is such an intimate thing, and it really is a conversation I'm having with myself on the page. And while I'm having that conversation, I'm really not thinking about you or anyone else, because if I thought too much about audience while I was building the thing, I would start to change the way I was building it, or I would second guess the way I was building it, or I would think, why am I building this? No one wants to read about my son's weird illness, 5 years ago, or why am I writing this? No one wants to know that I don't really do a great job gardening. My lawn is a mess. And so I try not to think too much about the relationship with the reader until I'm done. And then my job is to release it to the reader, and knowing that there will be some people who have their hands open and are eager and will receive it, I think in the spirit it was intended, and that there will be other people who don't have open hands who it will just sort of deflect off of them. And there might be other people with open hands who receive it and are sort of like, nah, that's not for me. And my goal is to like not think too much about that and to just go on to building the next thing and let the relationship that other people have with what I've made be their business. Just like my relationship with the books I read is my business and not necessarily those authors' responsibility or business. They've handed it off to me and now I'm taking it. And as far as the world, I think that really the two ways I feel most useful in the world are as a mother and as a writer, which is good because it's how I spend the bulk of my time, is doing those two things. And I do think of my teaching as an extension of my writing. I wouldn't teach if I didn't write. I teach as a practicing writer. So I'm trying to share, like, this is what's worked for me, what hasn't worked for me. Even my editorial work and the stuff I do on my Substack and everything else, all of that speaking, all of the things I do as part of my job are all outcroppings of being a writer. And I certainly spend more time parenting than I spend doing any of that. Let's be real. And so if the way that I feel like I'm most of service on the planet is by being a writer and raising these two people, that's sort of my connection with the world, is both via my books and the work that I do, and then via the people that I'm preparing to go out into the world, and hoping that like I've prepared them to be the kind of people we need more of. I think about that. I mean, ultimately it's up to them, the kind of people they choose to be when they leave. And kind of like books, when I'm done with them, like it's sort of not my responsibility after I'm done with a book or after I've sort of raised the child. But my hope is that I've sort of done the heart work on my end, that like I kind of feel like I can't go wrong once I let those things go. That was a really bizarre answer to that question, Charlotte. That's my
No,
answer.
it's great. It's great. I mean, I'm like nodding because I totally relate to it, and I think others do too. So thank you so much. And again, it's like I could totally just spend an hour talking about that response, but I want to get into a few more of my questions that I had for you. Well, this one wasn't, I didn't send this one to you, but because you started writing early, I'm interested in your experience with the like sort of writing rules and gatekeeping kind of things that a lot of writers have to process and navigate, and I think let go of, and like let go of what's not serving them. Did you have that experience? Like, did you absorb any of those messages and rules along the way that you had to let go of at some point? I'd like to hear about your relationship with rules.
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably inherited some, but I think I inherited some late enough that they didn't really stick. Um, because I started writing poems before I started really reading a lot of poems, which seems odd. And I started writing poems before I had any education in them. And so it's almost like if you picked up a guitar and taught yourself to play, you wouldn't know sort of what the rules were, what you were doing wrong, or even probably what you were doing right. You just sort of be finding your way. And then later, if you had a music teacher, they'd be like, how are you holding that? How did you? That's not at all like the fingering for that note, or that's not at all what you're supposed to be doing. And actually, and so maybe that you would have to kind of adjust later. And I think that's kind of what happened to me. I started writing poems um, sort of intuitively, and maybe the way in was music more than books. So when I was 13 and 14, I was listening to music constantly, and I still do. I am not listening to music now, but when I shut my laptop, I will be listening to music again. So that's just that's how we live here in our house. And I've been like that since I was a very small child. And so when I started writing poems, I think it really came as an outcropping of listening to, I mean, back then it was cassette tapes and also my parents' record collection, and trying to kind of transcribe the lyrics and thinking about what language can do other than tell a story. Because I think most of us grow up reading primarily fiction, whether it's, picture book, early readers, early chapter books, novels, like that's what we tend to read is fiction. And I don't really have that kind of strong narrative impulse in my writing. I think of myself more of an experience crystallizer and image processor than a storyteller. I'm much more interested in like being handed a stack of Polaroids and trying to kind of figure out what they are than I am being told like this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, like a timeline in a history book. I struggle with that. And so listening to music and hearing, like you can't listen to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds by the Beatles and not think like, oh, at 12 or 13, language can describe things in a unique way. and you sound in a really beautiful way and kind of make a picture for you in your mind of a time or place. And like, yet nothing actually has to happen. And there doesn't have to be a lesson. There doesn't have to be a happy ending or even an ending. It can just loop because that's what a chorus does. And you can kind of just swirl in it. And I think that was really what led me into poems. And so when I went and got my MFA and then studied creative writing before then as an undergrad, I remember a couple of professors being like, you're not really writing in sentences. And I was like, oh, okay. So I need to pay attention to syntax. Like just because the poem's in lines doesn't mean that there aren't sentences there too. Like, so I need to be paying more attention to like the grammatical units here. And also it can't just only make sense to me. Like it can make sense to me in a different way than it does to the reader because you're not me. So, you know, even just that poem, I know things about that that you all don't know because it's my life, but it has to make its own sense. There has to be a kind of sense possible for another person. And if it's completely cryptic, you know, like a Rorschach ink blot, or really hard to follow, you're doing yourself and your reader a disservice. And so that was something I had to kind of come around to. But rule breaking actually comes quite naturally to me, as I'm sure my parents would attest.
Okay, great. Thank you for responding to that. Something you said in your, I think because you said you started writing really young, I was like, well, does that mean that she got to skip all that rules things? Which it sounds like that was part of it, which is great. So you mentioned music. One question I love to ask writers, especially with regard to like nourishing ourselves, our minds, our hearts, our souls, is what types of art, and I mean all kinds of art, high art, low art, in between art, has nurtured you over the past few months, or hours.
Yeah, I mean, I do listen to music constantly. I always have my little AirPods in when I'm walking the dog or really doing anything. I have my record player behind me, which you wait, well, I can, yeah, there it is, and you can see all my vinyl. So if I'm in here, I listen to records, and I mean, I listen to music while I cook, while I, you know, take a shower, really anything. I'm always listening to music. I have a pretty wide taste. I mean, I'll listen to, I mean, I guess my probably mostly taste would be like Gen X indie rock. So I like to joke, I have the music taste of a 55-year-old man, mostly. Um, but I also like love Motown because it makes me happy. And I love old like 1960s, 70s singer-songwriter stuff because it reminds me of my mom and dad and the records we listened to when I was a kid. And I love 80s new wave because it reminds me of my own roller skating 80s childhood. So I'm not picky in a lot of ways. Like I really like to just listen to everything. I'm always reading. Um, so poetry tends to be the thing that I read most, and I'm a rereader of poetry. So I have, instead of a bedside table, I knew myself well enough to know that was not going to cut it. It would be an avalanche of books on a bedside table. So I actually have a bedside 4-shelf bookcase right next to my bed, and it's mostly poetry. And I rotate out every few months and kind of do a little bit of a switcheroo, so I'm not always pulling the same books off the shelf at night. But I love to read a couple of poems before I go to bed. I find that incredibly nourishing. Um, it's just something to kind of sit with. And poetry is so good for that because it's not like you need to remember the next day where you were or what was happening in the plot or who that one character's name was. Like you can actually pick up a book of poems and flip to any page and just read that page and then put it down, and you're not doing it wrong, which I love. So poetry and music are probably my big things. And something that's not maybe expected is I like watching true crime television. It's not soul or spiritually nourishing to watch true crime television, but it's my guilty pleasure.
Is it like an escape mechanism?
I don't know what it is. I think there's something that's so formulaic about it that I love.
Okay, but it's calming.
I couldn't tell you why I find watching murder investigations on television calming. That's so odd, truly, but my favorite genre of movie is also horror. So I think it's just that my like which I realize seems very like off-brand for me unless you know me personally and then
Right.
you're like, "Oh, Maggie loves horror movies." But my television viewing and movie viewing is very different from the sort of art I absorb in other areas. And so it's probably good that I don't actually watch a lot of television. When I do, it's like nothing that I probably should be watching.
Well, I probably would disagree with that. I think all of it is great and fine. Freedom. We have freedom in
We have
our art.
freedom, no guilt.
Yes. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to get to all the questions, so we can have time to talk about the book. Maybe real quick, what aspects of the writing life deplete you and what aspects of the writing life nourish you? And then we'll transition to a conversation about the book. And Maggie is going to read it to us. I'm going to stop the recording. She'll read it to us, and then I'll press record again for the conversation about it.
We're having a super secret read aloud, which I love. Depleting aspects of the writing life. Email? I would say that's number one, like just right off the top of my head. I could spend all day writing emails. I mean, I think we all are probably, regardless of what we do for a living, and what our lives look like. I feel like everyone has the sort of inbox of mayhem for one reason or another. And as I like to joke with people who don't think I respond quickly enough to email, my assistant is a Boston Terrier. So, yeah, if you get an email from me, it's from me personally, and I'm very slow because I would much rather be writing poems than emailing. So I would say that's the number one depleting aspect of the writing life um is email because it just never ends. Whenever you clear one, there's just like 5 more lining up behind it.
Yes, yes. And what about nourishing us? I mean, it's, I guess, something that you haven't mentioned already. Is there
Yeah, I
something?
mean, just the like the quiet time I get to have with myself, that's really nourishing. I sometimes I underestimate how much solitude I need. And that is it's always a mistake. It's always a mistake to underestimate how much solitude you need. And I am reminded, I mean, I just got back from a conference of writers in Kansas City. I managed to get out the morning of the Super Bowl, so I didn't get to see the streets lined with crazy fans. But 12,000 writers in one city for 4 days. It's incredibly nourishing for me to be in community with other writers. And also I'm an introvert. So for that, like that aspect, it's sort of like it can easily tip into depleting for me. It's like, and you have to really know yourself to be able to see that coming and not let yourself get into that red zone. So if I'm in like the kind of like green zone of like being in community and I'm really filled up by being in conversation with other writers, and then I get tired and I feel myself in that kind of yellow window, it's time for me to go home. So that I don't get into the red zone of like, I'm so cooked. And I've extroverted past my comfort zone. And now I need to go watch Golden Girls in my hotel room, and eat chocolate and like get ready to do this again the next day.
Yeah, yeah. What I may be wrong on this, but did you have an Instagram post before the Christmas holidays about how your kids were going to be home and you weren't going to have enough time alone to write. Am I remembering that? Was that you or was that
Oh,
someone else?
probably. Probably. I mean, I have sole custody of 2 school-age children, so the only time this house is quiet is when they are in school. And so for that, like 3.5 weeks of the holidays, it's just the 3 of us and the dog in this sort of fishbowl. And same with summer vacation. I mean, the summer, we don't do camps, we don't do anything. And so we're just sort of like in each other's hair constantly and trying to make a writing schedule, and carve out that time. Sometimes it requires getting up before they do, because no one's fighting me for that 5 to 6 a.m. hour.
Right, right. How old
Yeah.
are your kids now?
They're 11 and 15.
Okay, yeah, no, they don't want you at 6 a.m.
And they don't want anybody
Right.
at 6 a.m. So if I can set an alarm and get 3 hours of work in before 9, nobody's asking me to make them toast. Nobody's asking for anything. And that's the best thing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I always hated summers with my kids because they were always there. They're 19 and 21 and gone more now, which is also great. I love them, but I also need a lot of alone time. Okay, why don't, do y'all have any questions? Let's wait for the end to questions. Sorry. If you have questions about writing life or reading life, you can add them to the chat or jot them down on paper, not on the screen. I'm going to press stop and we'll listen to Maggie read the book and then we're going to talk about the book.
I haven't read this yet.
Oh, really?